Okay, well I have a strong cup of coffee, my laptop for YouTube instructions, and one previously mud-soaked Tavor. Let's do this. So this particular Tavor found its way into some very thick, sticky mud, was completely soaked, and it was field stripped and cleaned, and then later actually rinsed out in a bathtub and sprayed down with oil. But there's still some grit in some places where it shouldn't be. Let me move the microphone down here so maybe you can hear this. Here's the sound of the trigger. It's been described as a gritty trigger, but it shouldn't sound like that. And also the mag release. So there's a fair amount of grit in here, and it is time for a detailed strip. So the Tavor had an interesting performance in the mud. It's actually pretty well sealed up back here, where the action is, where the chamber is, but it's wide open up front. And you know, the thought is that all the important stuff is back here, but there are linkages. Our trigger's up here, of course the actual trigger pack is right here, so there's a linkage that goes from the trigger back to the trigger pack. Our mag releases are ambi, they're here and here. And of course the actual mag release is this bar right here. So again, there's a linkage that goes from here back to that bar. Now you can press right here and actuate the mag release, but that's really more of an emergency provision should this linkage fail. At any rate, the front where all these linkages are is wide open, and I believe a lot of mud ingress there and may have caused some of the problems. So the purpose of this is not to give instruction on a detailed strip of the rifle. This will be my first time going any further than a filled strip. So I'll edit out the more tedious parts. The real purpose is just to see where this mud went and where the grit is and how these linkages work so we can better understand the performance of this rifle in adverse conditions. Okay, so of course we're going to start with a filled strip. This is a pretty easy rifle to filled strip. Now, it has some captive pins. Mine are still a little stiff because the rifle is relatively new, although now it's been broken in properly. So I'm going to use a punch, but it is designed to accept the tip of a bullet, or of course in a pinch you can just do it with your fingers. It does have a good raised area on the other side here where you can get your finger under that and get it open if you need to do that. So you just pop that open, buttstock swings down, and all the guts fall right out the back. So it doesn't get a whole lot easier than that. The trigger group is held in by these two pins. The trigger pack, of course, we don't necessarily need to dump this every time, but we do have some grit, so we want to pull everything out and get it. So we drift drive these two pins. Again, a bullet will work. You do have to make sure they are all the way down. Trigger pack comes right out. And that's it. That is a filled strip right there. All right, now for the fun stuff. Okay, next we're going to remove the grip module. And that is just Phillips right there. Just got some grit on it. Looked like rust, but no, it's just Arizona filth. This tab retains the handguard, so that has to be removed before you can pull the handguard. And yeah, we've got some mud and grit all the way up in there. Now for the handguard, just this Allen key right here. And then our handguard comes off. And right away we can see, I don't know if you can see that, sand all inside of there. Arizona sand will get everywhere. All right, next is the charging handle, and that's really simple. We just pull it right out the front. Now, we also have a lot of grit on this. Now the next step is to pull the barrel. The barrel, gas block, and the rail come off as an assembly, which is nice because in theory if we're putting the same barrel back on, it should maintain zero, and we'll see how that goes. To accomplish that, we have a key little keyway right here that has to rotate 90 degrees to the unlock position. Now that takes quite a bit of torque and is also locked by this little tab here. Now they make a tool that fits in here perfectly. It's just like a little shaved down Allen key, bent 90 degrees. It does take a fair amount of torque, and I would definitely recommend that tool. I don't actually have it, and I'm going to be jerry-rigging something, and I'm not going to show that on camera, so it's not to set a bad example. Some have remarked that the sight tool end fits in there nicely, which it does, but with the torque involved to get this out of the locked position, all you're going to do is turn your sight tool into a spiral. So I wouldn't recommend that. Any rate, to unlock this position, you need a 2mm or 1/16 inch punch or something similar. You just put it in the little hole right there and pull up. And what we see that does here is raises this little tab above the polymer frame so that it can rotate. So you have to hold that up to get it started. Once you get it started, it'll be rested on the polymer, and you can remove this punch and turn it the rest of the way around. Okay, so now we have this magically in the unlocked position, and you can see the way that this tab rides up on top of the polymer there when you do that. So you only have to hold that open to start it. And at this point we can just slide this whole assembly. Yeah, it's a little stuck. There we go. Right off the gun. Now looking at this, we do have a lot of mud back there. I don't know how well you guys can see that, but that is got some goop. Okay, so the next step is to remove this little wipe. That just kind of sits on there. There we go, and you can see the hole is just in one side, so to charge from the other hand we just flip it around and use that side of it. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is remove this gas tube assembly, and that is actually held in by this little flush cup here. So to do that we need to pull this cotter pin. Find a little punch is handy for that, don't lose that little guy. And then just unthread this. If it's tight, they do have some little holes in here that you can slip a punch or a pick through to get a little torque on that. And we do have to keep a little tension on this side or hold the bolt in with a punch in here. It's just a free bolt down there, and you have to pull it out to capture the flats. Okay, pull that cup off, and then the gas tube can go forward and up. Alright, now we do have quite a bit of grit, sand and dirt right back here. So that got in from the chamber side. We are clean in between. So we didn't really have any ingress from the front of the rifle to the back of the rifle. All the dirt in the action came in right through the ejection port, and of course the dirt in the front, it's pretty obvious that has plenty of holes to come in through. So now that I'm looking in here, I can see how all this works, and it actually appears to be a pretty clever and pretty robust system, failures aside. One thing they've done is all of the actuating bars are under tension when actuated. So this is the trigger bar, and of course we pull. Now that makes it under tension, so we have less sponginess coming from here, and it's also less failure prone than it would be if it were pushed to actuate. We have the same thing over here. I can get the light on that. Over here with the mag release bar. You can see that bar is pulled to actuate the magazine. But anyway, let's go over these. We'll start with the trigger. The trigger is, this is all part of the trigger bow right here. And that pulls this flat bar, which runs down in between this aluminum chassis. The Tavor is an aluminum chassis inside a polymer housing. You can also see that right here. So there's your aluminum chassis inside of the polymer housing. So the polymer housing is really just a stock. This chassis is what does all the work. So these bars run down in between the chassis and the polymer stock. Now that means I'm going to have to pull this chassis to make sure those channels get cleaned out. but also, as you see, it doesn't offer much space in here for the trigger bar or the magazine bar for mud to get through here. Now we do have a bunch of mud still, even after the bath and everything else. We have a bunch of mud caked right in here, and that is the source of our grittiness with our trigger and with our magazine release, is all that sand right here acting on these bars. But again, this continued to work. So at any rate, the trigger, this is all part of the trigger shoe right here. All one piece, sitting on a simple pivot with the spring right there. The bar transfers, goes down in between that chassis. So looking at the back of the gun, if we look right here, that's the other end of that trigger bar. And it just has a stud pressed into it right there that actually pulls the trigger. So that bar is under tension, pulls this forward, and that is what actually pulls the trigger. So as that comes forward, we release the trigger. The safety is just a trigger block. So this is our safety. This is the safe position. Sorry, that was the fire position, and this is the safe position. So what we want to look at is right here. If we can see that flat right there, our trigger bar has an extension. Comes down right here. Sorry, that's hard to get some light on and show you. So that extension comes down right here, and when we pull the trigger, that extension is going to run into the side of the safety right there. So that extension is running into the safety. When we flip that to the fire position, this slot right here is going to rotate down and just give it just a little more room to be able to come forward enough to fire right there. So very simple mechanism there, not a lot of failure modes in that. Our magazine release is a little bit more complicated arrangement right here for it to be ambi. What we have is the main mechanism is actually the left side release. So the left side release, the button and this bar are all one piece, pivots right here. So this bell crank right there pulls, again I'm sorry it's hard to get light on this, pulls this rod right here. There we go, the bar is right there. That's the end of that bar. So if I press that magazine release, sorry it's really hard to get light down in there. There we go, if I push that magazine release, you can see that bar moves forward and pushes that round post right there. And what that does is that post is sticking into here right there and just pulls this bar to release the magazine. Now in terms of the ambi feature, the right side, it's a little ironic because it seems we're going to be using the right side a lot more than the left, but the right side is another little bell crank. You can see that right there. That pushes on this larger bell crank. So the small bell crank right here pushes on the bigger bell crank right there to actuate that system. So if what may have happened is we may have had debris stuck in here where you can't actuate this side, but this side still worked. If this side were to be blocked, neither side would work because this bell crank again just pushes on the other one, which actually actuates that bar. However, you would still be able to release the magazine by pressing very hard right here on this ribbed area of the release. All right, well, with as much mud as we did get down in here on these bars, I really think that I might as well at this point take this all the way down and pull this chassis out. And there's a little more to that. We have to pull off the magazine stop, the shell deflector, which goes into the chassis. We have to pull out this chamber block because these screws go down into the chassis. We have to remove our captured pins, this one at any rate, the main captured pin, and we have to remove this assembly. Now none of that is particularly hard to do, but it's kind of a bunch of stuff to do. I'm not going to go through these screws because that is pretty obvious. You just drive them out with an Allen key and they come right out. These are actually pretty simple, these captured pins. If I pull this back, sorry, get that in frame. What we see right there is we have a little spring. right here, if I just lift that spring up like that, then I can pull that pin all the way out. And that spring kind of remains captured, so I can just push it back in to have it lock again. Up here on the pivot, what we need to do is just turn the pivot. Now it's not under tension now, 90 degrees there. So it's between, straight up and down between lock and unlock. And then we can just push it right through. There's a little tab here that has to come through that slot. So we'll just wiggle that right out. And then that's free. So with that done, once I get these plates out, we'll be able to pull that chassis out and see how much gunk actually got back between the chassis and the stock. Okay, it does appear we're going to have to remove the trigger as well, because the pin comes out, the pin on this side comes through the chassis. So we're going to have to move the trigger pin as well to get this chassis off. In slipping it a little bit after I got the rest of the stuff free, quite a bit of mud did come out. So there is mud up front migrated between the stock and the aluminum chassis. So to do that, we just have to drive the punch pin out. It's not that different from removing the trigger of an AR-15 in that sense. We're just going to drive this out and pull it free. Alright, so I'm going to use my fancy armorer's block. Okay, trigger pin, and then we got to get this rod off of the trigger pin. So let me wrestle with that for a minute. Alright, and the trigger's in. That trigger spring is also, you can pull that out. That just lifts right out. Alright, now next I'm going to have to free the mag release bar. And I can't find instructions on this, so I'm flying blind. Disclaimer, I'm probably doing this completely wrong. But what I found is that this bar right here retains, we can get the light on this pivot that also holds the bar down. So what we need to do is pop this little guy out right here, and it comes right out. We'll have to remember the short end goes on the left side of the rifle. Then we can lift up this guy right here. And we can pull that right up and out. That's the pivot that does that. And that makes our bar free. Just have to get it, there we go. And then our bar's free, and it looks like the whole chassis will lift out now. Alright, so I'm going to wrestle this out, see if I can get it out without breaking anything. But the chassis should just slide out, yep, slide right out the back now. And we can see there is quite a bit of mud. Look at that trigger bar. Can you guys see in there? That is all sand. Mud and gunk and sand back in this bar. So this is the channel that sits between the frame, between the stock and this chassis. And it's not a big point of ingress, but obviously some stuff did get through there. It has to come all the way from up here, and it almost appears like this chamber's intent is to hold that crap. There's a little bit of an area down here, and there is a lot of junk down there. See right here where this smaller wrist sits. It sits right in here. Looks like that will collect any crap that's going back through here, so it doesn't ingress into here. But this got in from either side. It may have worked in from the ejection port, may have worked in through this slot in the trigger bar. Any way we do it, it's full of sand, and complete disassembly is the only way to get to this in order to get that out. Now a rinsing is not going to get that out just because it's you're not going to get any flow through there. So that is a negative thing about this rifle.
So it's the next day, and I've gotten the rifle all cleaned up and reassembled, and it doesn't seem to be any of the worse for wear. So what did I learn from all this? Well, as we expected, a lot of mud came into the front where all the linkages between the controls and the systems are. And that did cause a failure of the right side mag release. However, we still have two other ways to drop the mag, and those continued to function as did the safety and the trigger. So all these critical systems kept going through this rather extreme test. So none of that really gives me any pause. Also, very little mud migrated from the front to the back. Now it was very difficult to clean, much harder than say an AR-15. To clean that mud that did migrate back here out, as well as some of the mud in here. There was a little bit of residual. However, that didn't impede function. In fact, this rifle shot a match and did quite well between the time it got mudded and my detail strip. So we're looking about a long-term maintenance issue, not a function issue. Now, the back of the rifle. We didn't see any mud in places we'd expect it if it had ingressed through these points. In other words, I didn't see any mud between these two plates or under here, underneath the mag release, or around the bottom of the trigger group. So I don't believe we had any significant ingress in those points. I think all of the mud that got into the chamber, and make no mistake, if mud gets into your chamber, your rifle will fail. I believe all the mud that got into the chamber went in through the ejection port when the bolt was open. Now, of course, mud is free to go in there under those circumstances, and we did have a big curtain of mud right over the ejection port, impeding ejection and allowing a point of ingress when that bolt cycles. And I think that's exactly what happened. Now, does that invalidate the test? Well, no, absolutely not. It is a valid test. The reason being that a different design, one with, for instance, a spring-loaded ejection port cover, or bottom ejection or front ejection, may have fared much better. So no, it's still a valid test. But the value in these tests is to find the failure points so we can learn how to mitigate them. Now, in the case of a Tavor, we have no bolt cover, but we do have a bolt that really very well seals up the chamber. However, if mud is sitting down in this recess when the bolt cycles, it's pretty likely some of that is going to end up in your chamber. So what we would need to do here is simply wipe it off and wipe out that ejection port. If you can get the bulk of the mud out, you're going to be okay. So if I need to muck out a swamp with a rifle, I'm probably not going to choose a Tavor. But if you do, so long as you make sure the muzzle's clear and you wipe out the ejection port, you should be good to go. This way to pull the trigger.